Have you ever seen a 9-year-old take on a courtroom, armed with nothing but a notebook and courage? I am my mother's lawyer. The words echoed through the courtroom like thunder on a clear day, causing Judge Harrison to stop leafing through the documents and look up over his glasses. David Thompson was only 9 years old, but his voice cut through the formal silence of the family courtroom like a sharp blade. He stood next to his mother, Janet, who looked at him with a mixture of pride and terror. While across the room, Robert Wellington III, his biological father, almost choked on his coffee. "I'm sorry, young man, but this is a legal hearing between adults," said the judge with forced patience, looking at the skinny boy in glasses who dared to interrupt a $1 million custody case. "I know, Your Honor. I also know that according to Article 12 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, ratified by the United States, I have the right to express my opinion on matters that directly affect me." David adjusted his glasses and opened a scribbled school notebook, "And this case definitely affects me." The silence that followed was deafening. Robert Wellington, Chicago real estate mogul, wearing a suit that cost more than Janet earned in 6 months, looked at his two expensive lawyers as if he wanted to strangle them. No one had prepared the ground to face a child, quoting international law. Janet Thompson worked 60 hours a week as a nursing assistant to raise David on her own. In the 8 years since Robert discovered he was a father, he had appeared in the boy's life exactly 4 times, always with expensive gifts and empty promises. Now suddenly he wanted full custody. "Your Honor," Robert's lead attorney, Dr. Mitchell, interjected, adjusting his tie knot. "This is highly irregular. The child has no legal capacity to." David interrupted him with a calmness that made several adults in the room shift uncomfortably, "And if you really cared about my well-being, you would want to hear what I have to say rather than trying to silence me." Robert leaned over to whisper something urgent in Dr. Mitchell's ear, but David continued, opening his notebook with precise movements. "Your Honor, I have prepared a documented presentation on why I should remain with my mother, including evidence of the petitioner's true motives." He paused, his eyes meeting Robert's for the first time. "Motives that I believe the court will find very enlightening." Robert's face paled visibly. What exactly had this boy discovered? And how had a 9-year-old managed to prepare better for this hearing than he and his millionaire lawyers? There in that silent courtroom, everyone was witnessing something extraordinary. A boy who held secrets capable of bringing down empires built on lies. If this story of courage and intelligence is touching your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Black Voices, because what David was about to reveal would change not only his life, but the way the justice system views the voice of children forever. Dr. Mitchell quickly regained his composure as any experienced lawyer would. "Your Honor, while we admire the child's creativity, this court deals with complex family law issues that require adequate legal representation." "Then why didn't you provide one for him?" David asked, closing his notebook with a sharp snap that echoed through the silent room. "In the last 8 months of this case, no one thought it important to hear the opinion of the person most affected by this decision." Robert Wellington shifted uneasily in his chair. There was something about the boy's calmness that bothered him deeply. David didn't seem the least bit intimidated by the formal surroundings, the expensive lawyers, or the imposing presence of his own biological father. Janet watched her son with a mixture of pride and panic. For weeks, David had been coming home from school with strange books from a library, legal codes, children's rights manuals, court precedents. She had thought it was just academic curiosity from a bright child. She never imagined he was preparing for this. "Your Honor," Dr. Mitchell continued, "my client, Robert Wellington, is seeking custody because he is genuinely concerned about the welfare of his son. Ms. Thompson, while well-meaning, simply does not have the resources to provide the educational and social opportunities that a gifted child like David deserves." "Interesting," David muttered, opening his notebook again. "Genuine concern." He flipped through a few scribbled pages. "Your Honor, may I share some facts about this genuine concern?" Judge Harrison, who had presided over hundreds of custody cases, had never seen a situation like this. On the one hand, he had strict protocols to follow. On the other hand, this child displayed an articulation and preparation that surpassed many adults. "David," Janet said softly, "maybe we should let the lawyers." "What lawyers, Mom?" David interrupted her gently. "We can't afford to hire Dr. Mitchell or his colleagues. So, either I speak for us or no one speaks. Robert Wellington finally found his voice. David, son, I know this situation is confusing for you, but don't call me son. The words came out with a coldness that made several adults in the room shiver. In the last 9 years of my life, you've shown up exactly 4 times. 2 on birthdays, always 3 weeks late. 1 at Christmas when you had 20 minutes free between social engagements, and 1 when the local press did a story on philanthropic entrepreneurs and you needed a photo with a child. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert opened his mouth to protest, but David continued, the last time we saw each other 6 months ago, you spent 15 minutes in our apartment. Just long enough to criticize our furniture, complain about the medicine smell my mother brings home from a hospital, and suggest that I might have potential if I received a proper education. David adjusted his glasses. Interestingly, 2 weeks after that, you filed for custody. Dr. Mitchell whispered something urgent to Robert, but the boy wasn't finished. Your Honor, I've done some research on my biological father. I discovered that he recently lost a very expensive lawsuit against his business partners. I discovered that his third wife has filed for a contested divorce. And I discovered something very interesting about a trust fund established by my late paternal grandmother. Robert Wellington's face went from pink to white in a matter of seconds. How on earth had this boy uncovered information that not all of his lawyers knew about? David turned a page in his notebook and smiled for the first time since entering the courtroom. It wasn't the innocent smile of a child. It was the smile of someone who was holding winning cards and was ready to play them. But before we talk about inheritances and financial motives, David said, closing his notebook again, how about we discuss why a man who never showed any genuine interest in being a father suddenly developed such a strong paternal instinct? Robert Wellington was visibly sweating now, and his expensive lawyers looked completely lost. None of them had prepared to face a child who apparently knew more about their client's financial situation than they did. What exactly had this 9-year-old boy discovered during his afternoons at the library? And how had a child managed to gather information that adults with unlimited resources did not have? Judge Harrison leaned forward, his judicial curiosity clearly piqued. In 30 years on the bench, he had never seen such an articulate child in his courtroom. David, you mentioned evidence. What kind of evidence could a 9-year-old have gathered? David adjusted his glasses again, a gesture that was becoming his trademark in that courtroom. Your Honor, for the past 3 months since I learned of this lawsuit, I have devoted every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon to researching at the Central Public Library. Researching what? Dr. Mitchell interrupted condescendingly. Public records, newspaper archives, available corporate documents, Mr. Wellington's previous court cases. David opened a new section of his notebook. The head librarian, Ms. Rodriguez, has a master's degree in information science and taught me how to access basic legal databases. Janet looked at her son in amazement. For months, David had said he was studying for a special project at the library. She never imagined the project was to save his family. Robert Wellington finally exploded. This is ridiculous. A 9-year-old boy digging into my private life like some kind of private investigator. Public information, sir, David corrected calmly. All perfectly legal and accessible to any American citizen, regardless of age. Mrs. Rodriguez had become much more than a librarian to David. When he first showed up, asking about how family courts work, she quickly realized it wasn't academic curiosity. It was desperation masquerading as determination. That boy has been coming here religiously for 3 months. She had told Janet the week before when she finally called, concerned. He reads legal codes like other kids read comic books. He's learning too fast to be normal. David continued his presentation methodically. I discovered that in the last 18 months, Mr. Wellington has faced 3 significant lawsuits. He lost a $2.3 million dispute with former partners in Wellington Industries. His current wife, his third, has filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, legal code for he hid money from me. Robert's face was red with anger. How dare you? And more interestingly, David interrupted, turning pages methodically, I discovered that my late paternal grandmother, Eleanor Wellington, established a trust fund of $1.7 million specifically for me, accessible only when I turn 18 or when my biological father obtains full legal custody." The silence in the room was absolute. Dr. Mitchell whispered something urgent to Robert, who ignored him completely. "Your Honor, this is no coincidence," David continued. "My grandmother died when I was 2 years old. For 7 years, Mr. Wellington never mentioned my existence to her, never took me to meet her, never allowed her to know she had a grandson." Janet remembered it perfectly. Robert had been categorical. "My family does not need to know about it," referring to his own son as it. "But when Mrs. Eleanor Wellington discovered about me through private investigation, something I discovered in the estate records, she immediately set up the fund with one very specific condition." David paused dramatically, knowing that everyone in the room was hanging on his every word. "The money would be released for my care and education only if my father demonstrated genuine commitment to the child's welfare by obtaining legal custody. If he never sought custody, the money would go directly to me at age 18 with no parental access whatsoever." The math was simple and cruel. Robert had ignored David for 9 years, missing his chance to access the inheritance money through natural custody. Now broke and desperate, he was trying to force late custody to access the funds. "But there's something my grandmother couldn't have foreseen," David said, closing his notebook. "She didn't know her son would develop a career in ruining small family businesses through predatory practices." Dr. Mitchell stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this is getting completely out of hand. The child is making baseless accusations. I can prove everything I'm saying." David opened his school backpack and pulled out a surprisingly organized manila folder. "I have here copies of 17 lawsuits over the past 5 years where Wellington Industries purchased properties from financially distressed families for well below market value using insider information obtained through contacts at local banks." Janet watched her son turn a custody hearing into an impromptu criminal investigation using only a public library and relentless determination. "One of these families," David continued, pulling printed photos from the folder, "owned a small bakery. The Santos family, Mexican immigrants who worked 18 hours a day. Mr. Wellington found out through his friend at the bank that they were 3 months behind on their loan due to the emergency hospitalization of their youngest son." Robert Wellington was now visibly sweating. "This has nothing to do with, it has everything to do with it," David interrupted, "because it shows a pattern of behavior. A man who preys on vulnerable families for financial gain. And now he's trying to prey on his own vulnerable family for the same reason." Judge Harrison leafed through the documents David had presented, his expression growing increasingly serious. "Where did you get this information, David?" "Public court records, local newspaper archives, incorporation documents available on the state database." David listed each source meticulously. "Mrs. Rodriguez taught me that the truth is almost always publicly available. We just have to know where to look." Dr. Mitchell tried one last push. "Your Honor, even if these allegations were true, which we are not admitting, they do not change the fact that my client can provide better educational opportunities for the child." David smiled. Not the innocent smile of a child, but the calculated smile of someone who had saved his strongest card for last. "About education," he said, opening a final section of the notebook. "May I share something interesting about Mr. Wellington's educational plans for me?" It was then that Robert Wellington fully understood what he had underestimated. His 9-year-old son wasn't just smart, he was strategic, and he had uncovered secrets that even his own lawyers didn't know. What exactly had David discovered about Robert's true plans for his education? And how had a child managed to build a stronger case than millionaire lawyers using only a public library and the help of a dedicated librarian? In the silent courtroom, everyone waited for the final revelation that promised to be even more devastating than anything they had heard so far. On the subject of education, David repeated, opening a final section of his notebook with the precision of a surgeon. "I would like to share Mr. Wellington's true educational plans for me." Robert Wellington swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously between his lawyer and the boy who had become his worst nightmare. "During one of my 4 visits to him over the past 9 years, David continued methodically, I overheard a very interesting phone conversation. Mr. Wellington was talking to someone about solving the child problem after obtaining custody." Dr. Mitchell stood up abruptly. Your Honor, private conversations cannot. I can prove every word, David interrupted, pulling a small digital recorder from his briefcase. Ms. Rodriguez taught me that documenting evidence is fundamental to any legal case. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert Wellington was now visibly shaking, his fingers drumming nervously on the table as he realized he had completely underestimated his own son's intelligence. This recording was made during his last visit to our apartment 6 months ago, David explained calmly to the judge. Mr. Wellington thought I was doing my homework in my room, but the recorder was left on in the living room. Judge Harrison picked up the device and examined it. David, are you sure you want to present this as evidence? Absolutely certain, Your Honor. The sound of the recording echoed through the silent courtroom. The unmistakable voice of Robert Wellington spoke into the phone. Listen, as soon as I get legal custody, the boy is going straight to Riverside Military Academy. It's a strict boarding school in Colorado. They know how to handle troubled children. He'll stay there until he's 18 and I'll have full access to the inheritance funds for educational expenses. The other person's voice was inaudible, but Robert continued, exactly. $500 a month for boarding. The rest is mine. The kid doesn't even have to know about the money. It's a perfect solution. She's out of the picture. I have access to the funds, and I still look like a responsible father. Janet covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her face. She never knew Robert had planned to get rid of David so cruelly. Dr. Mitchell was pale, realizing that his client had just been destroyed by his own words. There's more, David said calmly, stopping the recording. This part is about what he really thinks of me. The second part of the recording was even more devastating. The problem isn't just the money. It's that the boy is too smart for his own good. He asks questions, observes everything. It would be best to keep him out of the picture until he's 18 and I can sort out the financial situation. Kids like him. Well, we don't want him getting any ideas above his station. Robert Wellington exploded. This is a trap. He provoked me on purpose. A 9-year-old boy can't. A 9-year-old can't what? David interrupted him, his voice cutting like a knife. Can't be smart. Can't defend himself. Can't expose the truth about a father who sees him as a problem to be solved. Judge Harrison turned off the tape recorder and looked directly at Robert Wellington. Mr. Wellington, this recording combined with the financial evidence presented paints a very clear picture of your true motivations. Your Honor, David continued, I have also discovered that Riverside Military Academy has a terrible track record. In the last 5 years, 3 students have committed suicide there. The institution is under federal investigation for physical and emotional abuse of minors. Dr. Mitchell tried one last desperate card. Your Honor, even considering these allegations, the fact remains that my client has superior financial resources. To do what? David interrupted him. To send me to a place where children die. To use my inheritance money while pretending to care about me. To isolate me from the only person who truly loves me. Robert Wellington finally lost his composure completely. You're nothing but an arrogant child who doesn't know his place. I'm your father, and you're a stranger who shares my DNA, David replied with a calmness that sent a chill through the room. A real father wouldn't try to get rid of his own son to steal his money. The judge banged his gavel to restore order. Mr. Wellington, sit down immediately or you will be removed from my courtroom. David turned to the last page of his notebook. Your Honor, there is one last thing I need to mention. Something I discovered about why my grandmother really set up that trust fund. Robert Wellington paled even more if that was possible. I found a letter from her in the estate files. A letter addressed to me to be opened when I turned 16. David took a deep breath, but the librarian helped me find out that I can request early access in cases of custody disputes. The final bombshell was about to drop. My grandmother wrote that she knew Robert was never a good father, that she established the trust specifically to protect me from him, and that if he ever tried to get custody of me just for the money, I should use every resource in the trust to defend myself. David closed the notebook and looked directly at Robert Wellington. She even hired private investigators who documented all of his financial schemes over the years. It's all on file with the fund's administrator. Robert Wellington slumped in his chair, finally realizing that he had been completely outmaneuvered by a 9-year-old. He had considered nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle. Judge Harrison banged his gavel. Based on all the evidence presented, including financial documents, recordings, and the plaintiff's demonstrated history, the custody request is categorically denied. Furthermore, I order a full investigation into the possible fraudulent use of trust funds. Dr. Mitchell whispered urgently to Robert, but it was obvious that the case was irretrievably lost. David methodically put away his materials, displaying the same calm he had maintained throughout the hearing. Your Honor, may I make one last request? You may, David. I would like Mr. Wellington to know that I did not do this out of anger or revenge. I did it because every child deserves to have a family that truly loves them, not one that sees them as a financial opportunity. As Robert Wellington left the room escorted by security guards, the judge had ordered his immediate arrest for attempted fraud. David finally allowed a small smile to appear on his face. In that silent courtroom, a 9-year-old child had just proven that intelligence, preparation, and true love can defeat any amount of money and privilege. But David's victory represented something much greater than a simple custody battle. It was the beginning of a transformation that would change his family's life forever. 3 years have passed since that historic day in court, and David Thompson's life has been transformed in ways that even his precocious intelligence could not have predicted. The recording that destroyed Robert Wellington not only won the case, it went viral on social media, turning David into a national symbol of a generation of children who refused to accept injustice silently. The video racked up over 50 million views and inspired legislative changes in 17 U.S. states. Today, we welcome 12-year-old David Thompson, who 3 years ago shocked the country by defending his mother in court using only his wits and a public library, announced the host of America's most watched morning show. David, how does it feel to be called the smartest kid in America? David, now taller and wearing new glasses, but still as calm as ever, smiled. I'd rather just be called David, who learned that every child has a voice, even when adults pretend not to listen. The studio audience burst into emotional applause. Janet watched from backstage wearing her nursing supervisor's uniform, a promotion she received after her story inspired a national campaign about working mothers. The hospital where she worked had set up a scholarship fund called the Janet Thompson Program for children of low-income employees. His mother is here with us today, the host continued. Janet, how does it feel to see your son become an inspiration to millions of families? Janet joined them on stage, still shy from all the attention, but radiating the same pride she had felt that day in court. David has always been special, but what makes me most proud is not his intelligence, it's his heart. He could have used his story to brag, but he chose to use it to help other families. And it was true. David had spent the last 3 years visiting schools in underserved communities, teaching children about their basic legal rights. His book, Every Child Has a Voice, had become a bestseller, with all proceeds going to a fund that provided free legal assistance to families in custody disputes. David, tell me about the cool law library project you started, the host asked. Well, after I saw how a public library saved me, I thought, how many other kids are going through similar situations without knowing where to turn for help? David adjusted his glasses, a gesture that had become his trademark. We created small sections in 1,200 public libraries with children's rights books in simple language, as well as computers with free access to basic legal resources. The camera focused on Janet, who discreetly wiped away a tear. In 3 years, she had seen her son transform personal trauma into a social movement. Meanwhile, across town, Robert Wellington watched the television program from his small studio apartment in the suburbs of Chicago. His hair was gray, his clothes simple, and he worked as a salesman at an electronics store, the only job he could find after his story became public. The court-ordered investigation had revealed not only the attempt to defraud David's trust fund, but a web of financial schemes that completely destroyed Wellington Industries. Robert lost everything: his company, his mansion, his marriage, his reputation. His former partners sued him for fraud, and he spent 18 months in prison. The kid's on the show again, he muttered to himself, turning off the television in anger. In 3 years, not a week had gone by without David's story appearing somewhere, reminding the world of his crimes. The most painful thing for Robert was realizing that David never spoke ill of him publicly. When asked about his biological father, the boy always responded with a maturity that further embarrassed the man who had tried to use him. "I hope he finds peace and learns that true love cannot be bought or stolen," David had said in a recent interview. Holding a grudge doesn't help anyone, but setting boundaries is essential to protecting those we love. Back in the television studio, the host asked her final question. "David, what advice would you give to other children who are facing difficult family situations?" David thought for a moment, then looked directly into the camera. "First, you are not alone. Second, you have more power than you know. And third, the truth always finds a way to win, even when it seems impossible." He paused, and when he continued, his voice carried the wisdom of someone who had faced giants and won. "Don't let anyone convince you that you're too small to make a difference. I was 9 years old when I changed my life and my mother's life forever. You can change yours, too." 6 months later, David received a special letter. It was from Sofia Martinez, a 10-year-old girl from Los Angeles who had used the Cool Law Library project to help her immigrant grandmother avoid an unfair eviction. The letter ended with, "Thank you for teaching me that every child has a voice. I used mine and saved my family." Janet found David reading the letter in his room, surrounded by hundreds of similar letters from children across the country. "How does it feel to know that your courage has inspired so many people?" she asked. David carefully folded Sophia's letter and placed it in the special box where he kept all his correspondence. "Remember when you told me that sometimes the scariest things in life turn out to be the most important?" Janet nodded, remembering that conversation perfectly. "I think I understand now. If Robert Wellington had never tried to tear us apart, I would never have discovered that a child can change the world when adults stop underestimating them." That same day, David received a call that would change his life again. Harvard University was offering a full scholarship to a special program in law and social justice. The first of its kind, created specifically for students who had demonstrated exceptional social leadership before the age of 16. "Will you accept?" Janet asked after David hung up the phone. "I accept, but on one condition." David smiled. "I want to use my education to create a legal system that protects all children, not just those who are lucky enough to be smart enough to protect themselves." Years later, when David Thompson became the youngest lawyer ever admitted to the bar at the age of 16, his first case was a lawsuit against the educational system for failing to teach basic children's rights in public schools. He won, setting a precedent that made legal education mandatory for all American students. Robert Wellington never fully recovered from his downfall. Living modestly and working jobs that barely paid his bills, he sometimes found himself thinking about the extraordinary son he had lost to greed. In moments of honesty with himself, he recognized that David had become exactly the kind of man he himself had never been able to be. David Thompson's story proved that true strength does not come from money or connections, but from a combination of intelligence, courage, and unconditional love. A 9-year-old boy had defeated a corrupt system using only a public library, unwavering determination, and the transformative power of truth. David learned that when you fight for what is right, the universe conspires in your favor. Robert Wellington learned that underestimating a determined child can be the most expensive mistake of a lifetime. And millions of children around the world learned that their voices matter, that their rights are real, and that they are never too small to fight for justice. David's greatest revenge was not destroying Robert Wellington. It was building a legacy that would save thousands of families from the same injustices he had faced. If this story of courage and determination has inspired you, be sure to subscribe to Black Voices for more stories that prove that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are the ones the world insists on underestimating.